Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Cutting-Edge PPC Bidding Strategies You Should Be Using. Today's webinar is hosted by Optimizer and Hannapin Marketing. Joining us today to present is Frederick Valleys. He's the founder of Optimizer. He's also going to be speaking at HeroConf in London, and he's a PPC hero blogger, and Fred can be found at Silicon Valleys on Twitter. Fred, welcome today. Glad to have you presenting with us.
Good to be here. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. And my name is Jeff Baum. I'm an Associate Director of Paid Search at Hannapin Marketing. I'll also be speaking at HeroConf London along with Fred. I'm also a PPC hero blogger, and I can be found on Twitter at JeffBaum7. So we would love for you to join in the conversation with us and make this a great interactive experience. So please send any Twitter tweets to the hashtag ThinkPPC, or use the webinar question box to send us any questions that you might have. We look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, and we have some live poll questions that we wanted to ask everyone to get this started. And so the first question that we have here is, how long have you been doing PPC? So you should be seeing a poll coming up on your screen right now, and then go ahead and select one of those four answers. So I'll give my answer here. So I've been doing PPC since around 1998 when I was in my dorm room in Stanford, and I was trying to sell videos that I bought on the cheap from Blockbuster, if anyone remembers that now defunct brand. But yeah, I was buying these video cassettes and trying to sell them to people through the internet all the way back in '98, and then I joined Google in 2002, stayed there for 10 years, and then really been involved in PPC ever since. What about you, Jeff?
So I've been involved with PPC since around the end of 2003. I was actually working for a chemical company, and we were in the process of digitizing a lot of their content, and we were building a self-service website. And then along with that, we decided to use Google AdWords in order to promote to businesses being able to order a sample online in order to start the sales cycle. So I got absolutely fascinated with it, and then I sort of took it to a level, I guess, all of them itself. I started, buying up PPC books and how to do it, and spending a lot of time at night, teaching myself after the family went to bed how to do PPC, and it turned into a career. So it's been an exciting ride.
Nice. So between us, we got 20 years of experience. That's what you're going to see in these slides today, hopefully. So, and it looks like most of you actually joined our ranks, so have been in PPC for quite a while. So almost a third have been doing this for more than 5 years. And then also welcome to maybe more of the newbies. So about 19% of people have been doing this for less than a year. So hopefully you'll take something away from this as well. I think we have one more question. And that next question, which you'll see on the screen in just a moment, is how do you manage your PPC accounts currently? And so for myself, of course, I've been a consultant. I've worked at Google. One of my interesting stories was at Google, I was one of the, I think, few people actually managing PPC campaigns as well as building the tools at the same time. And that gave me a pretty unique dual perspective on how things actually work. But even then, it was pretty shocking for me when I quit Google and I started managing accounts for people, that a lot of it was still very time-consuming, very difficult, and having been one of the people who built tools, so I was one of the people who started up the AdWords editor team. Pretty good tool, right? But still didn't save as much time as we thought it should, so that's why I ended up starting Optimizer, so now I'm a PPC tool company. And then Jeff, I guess it's pretty obvious there that you're an agency, but have you done anything else?
Yes, so you're right on both fronts, Fred. So I do currently work for an agency working for Hannapin, but at one point or another in my career, I've sort of covered just about all of the possible answers here. So I've been mostly part of in-house PPC teams, but I've also spent time as a consultant where I've done PPC for clients, but also had to market myself in order to get clients. So yeah, I definitely understand what all these different aspects bring.
Nice. And so it looks like here in this case, the majority of people attending our webinar today do work for agencies, and then we also have a good number of people part of in-house teams. And then we have people doing everything, all the marketing, including PPC. So good to have all of you on the webinar today.
Great. Okay, so we're going to jump into the meat of the webinar, but before we start, just wanted to let the audience know that at the end of the webinar, we're going to be doing a sneak peek of HeroConf London, where Hennepin's senior event producer, Nate Hollander, is going to jump on, and he's going to discuss what HeroConf London is all about, so we hope that you'll be able to stick around and join us for that. So without further ado, we'll jump into the meat of the webinar, and I'm going to start off by talking about bidding for profit. So one of my favorite shows on TV is Shark Tank. I watch it just about every night, and I'm fascinated by it, and I'm fascinated by this guy that you see on screen right now. His name is Kevin O'Leary. He's one of the shark investors, and one thing that he says that always resonates with me is, you know what I love? I love money. And when I really think about that and I kind of pull that apart, what he's saying is I really love revenue and profits. And that's really what, drives businesses forward. But also, when we're talking about, business and business metrics, there's an awful lot of acronyms and metrics that are thrown around, such as, CPA, ROAS, which is return on ad spend, ROI, cost per lead, and a whole host of other metrics. I hear it every day at Hennepin. I'm sure that Fred hears it, with Optimizer, and I'm sure that you and the audience deal with these type of metrics each and every day. One thing that I've learned about these metrics, though, is that they're very limiting in nature in terms of growth. All of these metrics is about gaining a level of efficiency, whether it's maximizing ROI or return on ad spend. What we find is that it's sort of limiting in order to be able to get growth. So a lot of times in order to gain efficiency, we have to sacrifice some volume in order to get there when we're trying to meet these metrics. So on this screen, you see Steve Jobs along with the iPad, and I'm sure you're all wondering what the connection is between bidding for profit, the iPad, and Steve Jobs. So when I really thought about bidding for profit, it really brought me back to when the iPad was first introduced to the market. And I remember when Steve Jobs announced it, I just felt that computing was just going to be different. The way that we interacted with each other in the digital space, we knew that we were in for something different. And that's the way that I feel about for bidding for profit. It's a whole different way of looking about how we bid, how we view bids, and how we use that to, as a strategic piece of growing our businesses. So now we're going to dive into bidding for profit and the mechanics of how it works. So before diving into the bids and setting a test live, there's a lot of work that has to go on beforehand. So in order to properly bid for profit and really scale out your business, you need to understand what all your revenue streams are. So if we take, for example, this is a screen print that I grabbed directly from Google that outlines it really great. So let's just say we have an online business and we've done X amount of orders. We need to understand beyond the amount of revenue that we're driving just strictly from our shopping cart business. We have to understand, in the world of, cross-device and apps, how much revenue are we driving from that? Our ads are just the beginning of the conversation when people click on them. Some people, they convert right away, or a lot of the times it's the beginning of the story. They may go to a website and then go, or it may be on a mobile phone, then go to your, to a desktop to your website, or they may go to an app. So there's this whole cross-device conversation that's happening. So there's revenue that's being driven from there. Then we have another subsection for people who have physical locations where they might be on their mobile phone, they pull up an in-store locator, and then they go to your store and then make a purchase from there. So that's another revenue stream. Then we have people who've clicked on ads, they've bought, and then there's orders that happen from word of mouth referrals. So in other words, we have all these different revenue streams because we have such a fragmented conversation that's happening now on the way to conversion that we have to factor all of this in. And then we have to factor in gross margins and whatnot. So the key is to really understand what's your customer's full lifetime value, and being able to do that. By being able to do that, we can make reasonable assumptions about our revenue. How much revenue in our best estimate are we generating? So when we factor out gross margins and advertising costs, we can arrive at a very good profit per new customer number. So understanding that whole piece before we even manipulate our first bid is going to put us in a position to win. So on this next slide, we're going to talk about the approach to testing. So, we've already done this analysis. We understand what our profit per customer is going to be, and now it's time to actually launch the test. So we have to understand what it is that we're going to test. And like most tests, we need to focus on areas of the account that's going to provide us enough conversion. So most of our accounts work with the 80-20 rule principle, where 20% of our account is going to generate 80% of the revenue or 80% of the conversions. So we want to focus on those areas of the account. The common practice when we're actually testing a bid increase is to actually test bids at a 25 to 30% increase. It's pretty steep, but it is common practice. And we also have to set the right time period for our bids. So that's very important. How long are we going to let this test run? Well, unfortunately, there isn't a cut and dry answer because every business is different. So if you're buying notebooks, for example, online, that's pretty much going to be an impulse buy. So you'll be able to run a fairly small test to get the results you need. On the other hand, if you're running an IT solutions company and your sales cycle is 6 months or a year, that time of testing in order to get the correct results that you need to monitor success or failure is going to be a lot different. And then the most important thing when you're actually monitoring your results, this is not the time to set and forget your bids. I know I've been sort of guilty of it at times, but 25 to 30% bid modifications is a pretty big deal, especially if you're in an industry where the bids in and of itself are expensive. So, keep all that in mind when you're taking your approach to bidding for profit. So on this next slide here, I have a couple different scenarios. And again, I grabbed screen prints directly from Google because they outlined the scenarios very eloquently. So in this first scenario, we're looking at the bidding for profit test across the account level. So what we have here is we've increased our bids, and we see the normal things that you expect to have happen would happen. So we saw that the cost went up dramatically, so we're just spending more. So, with the test bids, we saw the cost jump from $2,000 to $6,000. So it's a much healthier investment. We saw average position rise, which is something we would expect from increasing our bids. And we also saw CPA rise. So CPA has risen about 20% here. But what we see is a dramatic increase in converted clicks. So going from 80 to 200 converted clicks, that's a very big jump up in revenue. And as a result, profit rose almost 144% off of that 20% increase off of CPA. So with this highlighted examples, and what I believe the key takeaway is, would you be willing to sacrifice a little bit of your cost per acquisition in order to drive significantly more profit? And remember, driving significantly more profit puts more capital at the disposal of the company to reinvest back into PPC. So, think about your profit is a very important metric that can drive your business forward more quickly than maybe the incremental bids or incremental gains that you're going to make through the CPA or ROAS model. So on this slide, now we're taking more of a deep dive view. So for most of you that have accounts, you probably have a structure similar to this. So you have a campaign, and then your ad groups might be different product lines. So, for example, here we have metal detectors and shovels. So what we see in most tests in a bidding for profit scenario is not much different, is different products and different services are going to react differently to the test. So as you can see, for example, with metal detectors, we have a much stronger profit, so we can afford to test even higher bids. Where on the other hand, shovels didn't perform nearly as well, so we'll probably need to lower that bid. So we've already casted our wide net, by testing across the account the bidding for profit scenario. But now this is the point where you have to get granular and figure out where the rubber meets the road of where do we push bids and where do we need to bring them back. And we should always be aware of performance variance by product because, like I said, every product, every service is going to react differently to the test. So let's discuss now some practical considerations from bidding for profit. So account structure, in my view, is going to be key. So making sure that we're grouping profitable products and services together, it's going to make for a more efficient test. It's going to provide more reporting and analysis transparency. When we have our products, sort of scattered all over the place, it's a little bit harder to analyze and understand if the test is working. But if you have an account structure that has all of your most profitable services and products together, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to understand if your test is successful. The other consideration is it's going back to bids. 25 to 30%, especially with high CPCs, if you're in that type of business that has high cost per clicks, you need to institute bids and raise bids on a level that makes sense for your business. So the key is find a bid that you're comfortable with ultimately, but it has to be a significant enough bid in order for you to know that the bids are contributing to the success or failure of the test. So, raising bids 3 or 5%, you may not be out of the margin of error that could come through, just a normal fluctuation in your queries or your auctions. So make sure that your bids are significant enough that you know that the bids are truly driving the results. And then finally, prove your concept, test in aggregate, get the data back to understand whether the test is working or not, and then get granular to really tune it in so you can really maximize those profits. So the key takeaway that I found for bidding for profit, and really just for business in general, is profit is rocket fuel for a business. If a business, even though they may at times sacrifice a little bit of profit in order to gain that revenue, ultimately, if they're not driving maximum profit, then they're not going to be a business for that long. So it only makes sense to have your bid strategy be in line, with the ultimate metric. So, make sure that your bid strategy is not a limiting factor to your PPC success. So finally, just to tie you off the point on bidding for profit, it's all about convincing stakeholders, because making bid changes at this level is going to be large enough that there is going to be some account disruption. It should be positive disruption, but there could be some disruption in the account, and the stakeholders are going to need to be aware. So what I found to be successful when pitching the bidding for profit model is its innovation and telling your stakeholders that we're going to think about our PPC differently. We're going to do something that's different than our competitors and what they're doing, and I believe that bidding for profit is a way to get a leg up on them. Another area is growth. So we're removing the limitations that CPA or ROAS or cost per lead, naturally, put in place. So by removing those efficiency metrics and focusing on total profit, we can grow our business more quickly. And then, finally, just changing the thought process from bidding, from it being a tactical kind of to-do list, to something that's more strategic. And that's something that I had to, personally change and stop looking as bidding as it's just something that I need to do in order to get to another task, that it really is something that can really send a business to the next level. So, focusing on bidding for profit aligns business goals with the ultimate strategy, which is to drive more profit. So now that we've talked about bidding for profit, now we're going to talk about the weekend. So I think it's timely now that the weekend is coming up for some of us. It might be sooner than later, but hopefully by 5 o'clock tomorrow, everyone will be on the weekend. But we also know that being PPC professionals, that we're really on 24/7. We always sort of hold our breaths of what our weekend performance is going to be and what we might uncover when we come in on Monday morning. So in this scenario that I'm going to talk about, I was going through our daily tracker that we have for a client that I manage, and I was just looking over CPL costs. So this tracker tracks CPL, it'll track lead volume, it'll track total spend, it'll track search versus display. And I noticed when I was looking at this tracker, seeing a big variance in performance between the week and the weekend. As you can see here by the highlighted boxes, that there's a pretty big spike in lead costs during the Saturday-Sunday period. So this sort of led into the problem. With cost per lead being appreciably higher on the weekend, we were seeing a pretty big CPL fluctuation. So what was happening is the gains that we were making during the week were being given back and then some on the weekends. And ultimately what this was causing was a higher CPL that was making it tougher, if not impossible, to hit goals. And then what was happening is we were not getting leads at a cost that the customer can accept. So we needed to find a solution to this problem. So we used the tracker as a way of guiding our deeper dive analysis. So when we went into the deeper dive analysis, we identified the source of our lead spike, and it was in the Google AdWords search account. So based on now understanding where that cost per lead spike was coming from, we built an automated rule, which Fred is going to talk about in more detail in a few minutes how they work. We built a 15% reduction that we would implement account-wide between 12:01 a.m. Saturday and 12:01 a.m. Monday. So we wanted to work with cheaper bids to find out if that would bring cost per lead down. So what we found is some pretty interesting results. So the bid test worked. We were able to decrease CPL 22%, but despite the bid decreases, we were also able to gain some lead volume, and we improved our overall conversion rate. And while doing this, we reduced all those fluctuations that we were seeing throughout the account, and we were able to stabilize cost per lead and ultimately be able to hit goal. And we did this without sacrificing any volume during the week. So when we did a deeper dive, we were finding that the people that we were getting on the weekend weren't necessarily leading to conversions during the week. So we didn't disrupt the conversion path in any sort of way. So in all of these cases, when you run into something, there's always lessons that are learned. So the first lesson that we learned, from this exercise is always to have a performance tracker in place. So my call to action to you in the audience would be is if you don't have some sort of even rudimentary daily tracker for your account, to put one in place that you can track at least performance deviations, because what the traffic or the performance tracker does, it's sort of your guide and gives you direction to where your deeper analysis needs to be. And that's whether there's issues that need to be corrected or if there's opportunities to be found. The second lesson that we learned is understand your market's user behaviors. So what we have in PPC is not just a bunch of people that click. It's human beings that happen to be clicking on ads, and they have a a unique behavior all their own, and it changes over time. So we need to understand who's most likely to convert, when are they most likely to convert, and using your analyzed data, predict and adjust accordingly. And then finally, don't leave any stone unturned. When I was going down this road, I was concerned that that this test scenario is going to be too small and it couldn't possibly be weekend bidding that could be causing this account disruption. But when I reconsidered and decided to run the test, it had a great outcome. So really the big takeaway for me was all the answers and solutions to your PPC problems, they're right there in your data. You just have to be able to dig deep enough to be able to find them. So with that, I'll turn the mic over to Fred and let him talk about some bid automation.
Thank you, Jeff. So some great stuff. So now what I wanted to talk about was how can you automate some of these principles that Jeff has covered, and even a couple of other ones. So if you look at the next slide, the reason we look at automation is for a couple of pretty obvious reasons, I think. First of all, people, all of us in this room here today, we tend to get distracted. We tend to want to work on the fun projects. Maybe half of the people in this room today watching are also going to self-admit to being pretty bad at math. You know, even though we're PPC specialists and math is behind everything we do, ultimately we're not as good as machines are at doing calculations. And so what you may end up having is people coming into the office wearing these shirts, and I can't even say out loud on a webinar what it says on those shirts, but these shirts are actually handed out by a PPC tool company. So I think it's very relevant. And basically they're saying, we wish that we didn't have to do all of these processes repetitively, manually all the time because it takes us so much time, and we'd rather be working on the fun stuff of marketing, which is really being creative and coming up with new messaging, new strategies, right? Not just number crunching. So if you go to the next slide, what this really talks about is that even though you could put automation in place to fully replace humans, that's often not a good idea. And so there was a great article that ran in Wired magazine a couple of years ago, and they were looking at how a computer can beat a human at chess, but a human assisted by a computer can beat that computer. If you look at people forecasting the weather, they do a better job if it's the human sort of monitoring what the machine is doing. But obviously the human by himself or by herself couldn't crunch all the data necessary to predict the weather the way a machine would. So there is a benefit to leveraging the best of automation, but still making sure that your humans are very much in the loop. So let's go to the next slide. And so that brings me really into the section about tools. So let me off with the next slide here. And this is a banana stand. So why are we talking about a banana stand here? Well, it is kind of to illustrate in a different way some of the principles that Jeff was talking about maximizing profits. So say that you're George Michael. You're running a banana stand and you sell your bananas for $2.50 a piece. Now your supplier comes to you and says, I've got 3 pallets of bananas left. These are the last ones I have. There's 1,000 bananas on each of the pallets, and the first one I will sell to you for $1,000. So $1 per banana. The second one I'm going to sell to you for $2,000 or $2 per banana, and the last one for $3,000. So now if you're George Michael, you have 2 decisions, or you have one big decision to make, right? You could say, okay, the total cost for the 3,000 bananas is going to be $6,000. So that's an average of $2 per banana. If I'm selling them for $2.50 a piece, then I can probably buy all of those bananas. However, if he reruns the math on each individual pallet and he says, oh, well, that last pallet of bananas that's being sold to me for $3,000, that's actually $3 per banana. So if I'm only selling them for $2.50, I'm going to lose 50 cents for each of those bananas. However, if he does that, he's going to grow his business, right? Maybe somebody will come by and be very impressed by how many bananas he can sell and acquire the business. So he's maximizing revenue in that case. But if he just wants to go home at the end of the day with as much money in his pocket as possible, he's probably going to be looking to maximize profit. So he would not buy the 3rd pallet of bananas because he'd be losing money on every incremental unit that he sells. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, and let me bring this back to an example that's actually super relevant now to PPC specialists. Excuse me. So what you can see here on this slide is, first of all, the bid simulator, right? So this is a tool that Google gives you, and it tells you how many clicks you could expect at different bid levels that you have. Now, there's one column that's missing from this, and if you click next, you'll see that you can very easily calculate a field called incremental cost per click. And look at this example. So even though in the top line your bid is $1.09 and your average CPC is only 72 cents, your incremental cost per click is $1.44. An incremental cost per click, by the way, that is the amount you pay to achieve that next group of clicks. So if you were bidding at 96 cents, you would have gotten 3,090 clicks. To get those next roughly 300 clicks to take you to 3,360, the number on the top line, you would have paid on average for those clicks $1.44. Now this is super counterintuitive, right? It doesn't even really make sense in my head when I think about this, but these numbers are true. You can calculate it for yourself. And what doesn't make sense to me is the fact that I'm bidding $1.09, yet my incremental cost per click, so my actual real cost per click seems to come out to be $1.44, which is higher than the maximum that I set in for Google. And really the reason for that is that there's a heavy discounting component happening. And so at the end of the day, with the averages, everything works out. But if you click next, you'll see that for us as marketers, we have to make that decision. Are we trying to maximize the profit, or are we trying to maximize the revenue and potentially giving up some of the profit, giving some of the profit back? And so depending on what your situation is, you're going to make different decisions with this data. And the reason I put this on the tool slide, of course, is that given this bid simulator, it's very easy to calculate that additional column and really get what is that sweet spot for your business, what is the right bid you should be setting. And in a couple of slides, I'll even take this example a step further, and we'll look at incremental cost per conversion. Okay, so if you go to the next slide, this one I wanted to tie it back into the weekend bidding that Jeff was talking about. So I was at a conference recently, and Jeff Allen, the president of Hennepin, was talking, and he was going on about how he was sitting on a plane, and he spent several hours pulling data for this presentation that he was making. And he said, you know, honestly, it was a pretty easy analysis, but most of what I spent my time doing was pulling the data and then figuring out I had the wrong date range, or I had the wrong campaigns, or I wanted to narrow it down. And so he had to, you know, re-download that data, and that was what took most of the time. And that's where tools come in handy, right? So the screenshot I'm showing you here is one of our tools at Optimizer, but there's plenty of tool choices out there. And so what these tools often help you do is we'll pull that data in a matter of seconds, and we'll give you a visualization. And here what we're showing to you is the conversion rate pattern across a typical 7 days of 1 week, right? So on Mondays in the afternoons, you tend to convert better. It tells you that very quickly. And then you can also quickly set your bid adjustments to really capture some of that higher conversion rate to make sure that you're capturing the full impression share at those times of the week. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. Now this gets into the two types of bid management options that we all have available. Fundamentally, there's two different types, right? There's a rule-based bidding, and a rule-based bid is simply if two conditions are met. So if it has more than 100 clicks and the CPA is less than $20, then my decision is to raise the bid by 10%. So very simple rule. If this, then that. The other one, the more sophisticated one, is a portfolio bid strategy. And the trick here is to find similar entities across your account and manage these to a common average goal. And that often helps you with low data. So if you don't have enough data for individual items, but if you can decide that these items tend to have some similarity to each other, then maybe you can make the same bid decision across the board. And that was kind of to Jeff's example, where it really matters to structure things in ad groups where you have similarly performing items close to each other. And oftentimes that just means having the same types of products in an ad group, but in some cases it could mean that you want to create ad groups around the conversion rate patterns that you see for items. So let's go to the next slide. So let's take a look now first at a rule-based system and what kind of automations you would have. So the next slide is another example. This is from an agency that I've worked with, and so they have this bid bucket method. And basically what they do is they filter all of their keywords into 3 buckets. And they actually do more than this, but this is an example. So they have a bucket of high converting keywords. So these are keywords that in the last 30 days have converted at least 5 times. And then it goes all the way down to the unknown bucket. So in the last 30 days, they haven't had any conversions, but they've also had very few impressions. So there was no assumption that these should have been able to convert. They just maybe were too lowly positioned on the page, right? Maybe they were on page 2 of the search result. So if you click next, you'll see that what they do based on this filtering is they say, if these conditions are met, then apply these bid strategies. And here they're applying some of Google's automated bid strategies. And so in the first case, they might want to bid to the top of the page, whereas in the final case of the unknown, they might simply want to say, well, let's at least set the first page bid so that that keyword starts to get some volume so that we can build up data to make a better decision, hopefully the next time we run the same analysis. So if you go to the next slide, really one of the key things here with a rule-based system is that you have to be sure you have mutually exclusive groups. So a common risk in bid automation is that you start stacking your bids on top of each other. So for example, if you say, find me everything that has more than 100 conversions and bid it up by 10%. And then find me everything that has more than 20 conversions and bid that up by 10%. Well, guess what? The items that have more than 100 by default also have more than 20. So you've now increased the bid 2 times in a row. So you've been stacking your bids and you've actually bid more than you were thinking you would. So here's an example from a friend of mine by the name of Mike Rhodes. He's one of the authors of one of the AdWords books. But he came up with this example. It's kind of a mind map structure. And at each level, he's splitting his buckets into more granular groups. And at each stage, he's only making one difference. And so what that achieves is that all the way on the right, your buckets are mutually exclusive. You're never going to have a keyword that sits in multiple buckets because at each point there's a branch. So this would be a great way if you were running a rule-based methodology to make sure you're not double bidding. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. So the second problem that we have when we're doing rules-based bidding, where we're making the decisions, is getting the right look-back window. And so here's an illustration again from one of our tools in Optimizer. And what I wanted to illustrate is that here what we have is we have keywords that haven't converted in the past 30 days. Now, if you actually look at a secondary date range and you look for those same keywords that have no conversions in 30 days and you say, have they converted in the last year? Well, you see one of them never has and the other one actually has. So there's 2 kind of decision points, right? So be really careful. If you use a look-back window, make sure it's long enough to give you the right data, because if I had made a decision for both of these keywords to turn them off, that probably would have been the wrong decision. In the case of that second keyword, the one that used to convert, I really should be evaluating why it stopped performing. You know, maybe I bid it lower for a while, but I'm certainly not going to delete it because this is something that could drive business for me, that could drive conversions for me. So let's look at the next slide, and that's going to be the third problem in bid management, and that's really figuring out your data density. And so Jeff was alluding to this, but the problem is oftentimes that you just don't have enough data for the item for which you want to bid to make a sensible decision. I mean, if something has 5 clicks and 1 conversion, is that really a 20% conversion rate? Well, mathematically, yes, but can you trust that in the next 5 clicks there's going to be 1 more conversion? That's kind of doubtful in my mind. I'd rather see, you know, maybe like Google does, maybe 15 conversions before I decide to calculate the conversion rate. So when you're looking for that data density, there's really 2 methodologies you can use. So you can either look higher up in the hierarchy of AdWords. So if the keyword only has 1 conversion, but you've done a good job of grouping that keyword with similar keywords in ad groups, maybe you can look at the ad group's conversion rate, and that could be representative of what that keyword might do in terms of performance. And at that level, maybe you have 3 conversions. They can go up to the campaign level, right? Now maybe you have 10 conversions, so you have a more solid data points to use in your calculation. The other approach, of course, is to simply go back further in time. So now you can say, okay, I'm going to stay at the keyword level, but instead of looking at 7 days of data, let me look at 28 days, or let me look at 56 days. Let me go back far enough that I have enough data. The consideration here is obviously you have to make sure that your business is not highly seasonal, right? If it's highly seasonal, then you don't want to look too far back because those numbers might be skewed. In no cases that I know of would I look back further than a year because things move so fast in this industry. You know, even just the search results page, the way that looks changes all the time, and that does have an impact on CTRs, conversion rates, and some of these metrics I would be using to do bid management. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. Now, what I wanted to illustrate is You don't have to be limited to just going up in hierarchy in the account or back further in time. You can actually jump between the two. And so we've done this for a couple of clients that we've consulted with, but basically we say, let's look at the keyword data for 7 days. If we don't have enough conversion data to figure out what the conversion rate is, let's look at the keyword for 28 days. If we still don't have it, now let's go look at the ad group, right? So we don't have to go too far back in time by being able to jump between keyword, ad group, and campaign. So that's an alternate way to do it. So let's go to the next slide here. And so this is, again, to illustrate one of the things that Jeff was saying, but I'm an engineer, so I often like to complicate solutions. I've actually written full AdWords scripts and spent 1 or 2 days doing these, and then at the end of that process, I realized, oh, wait, I could have just used an automated rule from Google that I could have set up in 2 minutes to do the same thing. And that's kind of an unfortunate position to be in, right? Because then I've just wasted all this time doing something that would have been really easy. So what Jeff was saying with increasing the bids on the weekend, well, here you have it. It's an automated rule. You can just simply say something like, if the position is lower than 3, then increase my bid by 10%. So that would be an example. And if you click next, you'll see the second part of that example, but this is just bidding to position. So you can do bid to position through an automated rule. Now the reason that an automated rule is not that powerful is that you can only execute it at most once a day, and you're limited as far as the look back window. So you're typically limited to 1 look back window as well as 1 hierarchy in the campaign. So if you're making a keyword level decision, you kind of have to use the keyword level data for that decision. You can't look higher up in the account. And that's where AdWords scripts will come in handy, and we'll talk about those in just a couple of minutes. Okay, so let's take a look at the next slide here. Now we're going to talk about portfolio-based strategies. I'll go into the next slide. So when it comes to portfolio, really the easiest and cheapest way for sure is to use Google's flexible bid strategies. And these are pretty cool because they can be applied across different levels of the account. And the way that these flexible bid strategies act like portfolios is that, unlike in the past, you're not just saying, okay, here's a rule for this one campaign, and then you have a different rule for a different campaign. Here you can start mixing and matching. So if you figure out that, you know, maybe some keywords that behave similarly in terms of conversion rate live across multiple campaigns, you can take those divergent keywords and put them into the same flexible bid strategy. And now Google's going to use the data from all of these keywords in different places of the account to figure out what each of the new bids should be. So you're basically defining the portfolio on Google's behalf. Some pretty cool bid strategies, all the basic ones that we're used to are in there. One that's a little bit newer is target outrank. So if you have a specific competitor that came into the auction and you want to start outbidding them, outranking them, you can do that. That's now an automated bid rule. And then more than a year ago at this point, Google announced they would have bid rules for maximizing revenue and maximizing conversions. And these are exactly what Jeff was talking about. That's the kind of stuff we have to do manually at this point to really achieve it. But Google has plans to introduce these as new flexible bid strategies. So let's go take a look at the next slide here. So when it comes to these bid strategies, some of them are based around setting a bid that's related to the top of page bid estimate or the first page bid estimate. I don't know how many of you read my articles on Search Engine Land, but the last one that I published had what I thought was a pretty interesting finding, and that was that for a keyword whose quality score had changed, in 71% of the cases, we saw no change in first page bid estimate. And that doesn't make sense, right? Because if your quality score has gone higher, then presumably your first page bid estimate should have been lower to compensate or to reward you for the higher quality score. So what I'm taking away from this is that there's some sort of a delay between when the first page bid estimate is updated and when the quality score is updated. And the reason I wanted to point it out is that if you have a rule that says bid to the first page bid estimate, well, that first page bid estimate may not actually be accurate. So do take those things with a grain of salt. And we've actually seen that in practice. We're using the first page bid estimate and didn't get us a high enough bid to get to the position that we wanted. So let's take a look at the next slide. Now, real-time bidding. So real real-time bidding is another thing that everybody really wants to do, right? So can we find a bid management engine that does real-time bidding? Well, the answer is no. Nobody can do it because that's just not the way Google is built. You can only tell Google your bid for specific situations, so you can set bid modifiers for devices and locations, but you can't say when the search happens, Google tells you exactly what the search was, exactly what the IP address was, and then you fire back the exact bid for that situation. That's not possible. Now, Google, on the other hand, is able to do some of these things because they know all of these factors that go into the auction. And so if you're using some of their bid strategies, they're actively, for that single auction, going to increase or decrease your bids to get you the best results. So that's the reason why I do like these technologies. So let's go to the next slide. So here's a good example of what Google knows, and this is some of their newer stuff that they announced recently. But basically, this is a data-driven bid methodology. And so there's two examples here. In one example, a person did two searches, search B and search C. Google noticed there was about a 2% conversion rate. Then they also saw that if a user did those same two searches, B and C, but preceded it with search A, the conversion rate was 3%. So now they can say, okay, adding search A to the mix seems to boost, in real terms, your conversion rate by 1 percentage point, right? It doubles it effectively. So based on that additional search, Google can now actually set a really good bid that accounts for that increase in conversion rate. So that's something that's going to be possible soon. So let's go to the next slide. Now, the thing with these bid strategies is that, again, we sort of want to know what's going to happen if we do change the bids. And Jeff showed you an example where you actually run an experiment, and then you get the data, and that's great. There's no comparison to actually running the data and knowing what specifically happened. But if you wanted to predict it and you know, maybe not know exactly, but kind of have an inkling of what might happen, you can now use the bid simulator to look at different bid strategies and what would happen if you changed your target CPA. And notice in this table here, you see the number of conversions, you see the total cost. So guess what? I can add a column to this manually calculated that shows me my incremental cost per conversion. Again, this is great. If I'm looking to maximize profit, this table tells me exactly the bid I need to be at to where I'm maximizing my profit or alternatively maximizing my revenue. And then let's look at the next slide. The next slide talks about these bid strategies can be a little scary for people, right? Because we're basically giving away the control to Google to do what they think they want to do. And many days when you're running a target CPA algorithm, you're not going to hit the CPA target that you had, right? And you would like to know, why did Google miss my CPA target? Well, here, now they're going to be telling you the period when the algorithm is still learning, right? In the period it's learning, it may not know exactly where to set the bids, so it's expected that your CPA is maybe not going to be hit. Now, on future days, maybe there's some days with not enough data, and so it's missing the CPA target because it didn't have enough data points. And it's going to indicate that to you so that you have a better sense of why Google's either meeting or missing your expectations. So I think that's a really great innovation you're bringing to the table. So let's take a look at the next slide here. So the other thing I'll quickly point out is Google does use your conversion data in different ways. Go to your conversion settings page and make sure you're telling Google if they should optimize for conversions or converted clicks. This is also where you're going to be able to tell it which attribution model to use. Let's go to the next slide. So word of caution about all of this bid automation is, again, we cannot become slaves to this technology. We have to monitor it. We have to be on top of this, because if we set it and forget it, that's when trouble breaks loose. A really quick example, there was a custom t-shirt company. They were using bid automation from a really good bid management provider. This company launched a new homepage. The homepage had a terrible conversion rate compared to the old one. The bid management system didn't know something had changed, but they did know that the conversion rate was dropping, so they did the correct thing and they reduced the bid of the most popular keywords by a tremendous amount. These keywords fell off of page 1 of the search results. Of course, the company knows that the landing page is broken, so they go and fix the landing page, bring it back to the conversion rate it used to be at, but nobody remembered to tell the bid management system. So there, the bid management system was sitting with what it thought was now the correct bid on page 2 of the search results, and their top keyword was basically out of action for a couple of months until someone realized, whoops, we should have actually reset the bid algorithm based on these couple of days of broken data. So that's how things can really go wrong. Let's take a look at that next slide. So here we're going to talk then about the full automation, right? How can you get really, really sophisticated? Now, this is not a technical session, so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what you can do with AdWords scripts, but I'm not going to tell you exactly what the code is, so don't worry about that. So let's take a look at the next slide. But for those of you who have not used AdWords scripts, these are basically little pieces of JavaScript code you can program into your AdWords account and schedule it to run automatically as often as once per hour. So what are some of the things you can do? Let's take a look at the next slide. AdWords scripts have come a long way since they were launched about 2 years ago. Nowadays, you can do shopping product groups. You can do advanced stuff like prediction APIs. You can definitely work with bid strategies. You can do reporting. So all of these things on this list, you can in some way automate in a relatively easy self-service way. Let's take a look at the next slide. So what are some of the examples? So one of my favorites is the Google Prediction API. Now, the Google Prediction API, let me give you an example of what it does. When I was at Google, we had this whole ticket system. We could tell people, we could file a ticket when a chair was broken, when we saw a raccoon running around campus, all kinds of stuff happening, right? And so people were manually reassigning those tickets until it got to the right department that could fix that issue. Google put in place the Prediction API. It started looking at those tickets, and it looked at what was in the text of the ticket and which was the department that closed it. And based on that, they were able to start categorizing. And now when a new ticket is submitted, the Prediction API looks at it and says, this is most likely an issue for security, for facilities, for the kitchen, whatever it is. You can use that same methodology to classify all of your keywords into the correct portfolios. So you can use the Prediction API to put things in the right portfolios, and then you can use bid management on top of that to set the bids based on that aggregate level of data. Let's look at the next slide. So the next one is an example where you use a calendar of holidays. And here, if you click next 2 times, you will see that for different holidays, we're automatically creating an ad for each of those holidays. So the script is tied into a Google Calendar. It automatically changes the ad text, and it can automatically change the bids for those specific holidays. If we go next, you'll see another example. This is where you use really some of these advanced rules for rules-based bidding. So different look-back windows, different hierarchies in the account. You can actually put a graphical user interface on that if you want it to get really sophisticated. So that's one of the things we do. But this gives you a full rules-based bid engine using all of the techniques that I explained. And then if you go next, I'll have one more slide, and this is about reporting, right? So a lot of the work we do in bid management is also figuring out what are the bids, what should they be based on the underlying data. So you can automate running the reports through a script, and here's a simple example where we look at maybe what's the conversion rate based on the different variations of description line 1 you have in the account. So lots of possibilities there with scripts, and I think that's my final slide, and we're running a little bit long, so I think we'll open it up to questions right now.
Sure. Well, Fred, thanks for that great presentation. And before we open up for questions, just wanted to put out there that if you need any assistance for your PPC, Hannah does offer some ongoing and one-time retainers. So if you want to learn more, just click on www.hannahpinmarketing.com/PPC-retainers. And now I think we're ready for some Q&A.
Okay, so we have a question. Many clients have never thought about total lifetime value of a customer client. How best to take them through that thought process? Jeff, any thoughts on that one?
Sure. So, I mean, I think I would go back to what the lifetime value is, really understanding, how often your customers come back, and also just like that first slide, identifying all your different sources of revenue where your customers could be coming from and where they are in the conversion cycle, and really getting a hold on that. That would be the first key step.
Great. So the next question here, Jeff, is is it relevant to use bid strategies when we don't use conversion tracking?
I would feel that without conversion tracking, I wouldn't be comfortable using automated bid strategies, because it's so dependent on it to the conversion tracking to get the data it needs in order for the system to essentially become smart to know how to adjust the bid. So I think until that gets fixed or implemented, it's probably best to do your bidding manually.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I mean, you should really have conversion tracking fixed up for all of your clients. But in the cases where you can't do it, there are still some flexible bid strategies that don't employ the conversion data, such as bid to position, outrank a competitor. So if branding or that kind of consideration was more in play, then you could still do it without the conversion tracking. I'm getting a lot of questions here, so I'm going to kind of go random here, but how often should an automatic rule run if it's working with 7 days of data?
How
So yeah, let me maybe start with that one, Jeff. So how often should an automatic rule run if it's working with 7 days of data? So if you have a look back window of 7 days, then I would recommend you don't really change your bids other than once every 7 days. It does get tricky, right? Because you could run that rule daily, but now you kind of have to split your data into two portions. You have to say what happened before I changed my bids yesterday and after I changed my bids yesterday. So in most rules, you're trying to look at what is the behavior that's currently happening. And so if you go back in the look back window that goes beyond your last bid change, that spans over your last bid change, then your data is not quite as reliable. So that's one consideration there. There are ways to do it, but it does get a little bit complicated in terms of keeping all the data in the right places. Let's see, is there a way to pull a bid simulator report in bulk? We would like to increase bids on all high converting keywords where this is missed opportunity. One at a time would take forever. Yeah, so, and that's unfortunately, I mean, I know a lot of agencies on the line and that's kind of where we earn our keep. But unfortunately, that's not one that Google has automated. Though I will take a look in Optimizer. I don't think it's available through scripts. But I think that would be a cool one to do.
That would be great if we can ever get to that point where we can pull Bid Simulator in bulk.
Exactly. So another question regarding bidding to profit, Jeff. Have you had difficulty establishing the profit mark to hit with your clients? And if so, what tips have you had in working with them?
Sure. So, we have run into that because some clients aren't willing or aren't able to provide the exact profit numbers. So you have, for example, we've had some clients that are, they're privately held, so they're just not going to share that information. So it makes it sort of difficult to run those numbers, and get precise. So what we've done in the past is we've just asked for best estimates or even loose estimates, and that seems to have been helpful and is a workaround around that because you definitely will run into those obstacles.
Great. So we'll take two more questions and then we'll talk about HeroConf London briefly. So the question is, I use Optimizer and a bid management tool at my company. How do I get the most out of both? Can I use them both at the same time? And so more generically, yes, you can definitely use multiple tools at the same time. You can stack them on top of each other. But again, you just have to think about what is each tool doing, right? So if you're using two tools that both change bids, then they're probably going to start interfering with each other. But if you use a tool like Optimizer to maybe find the best performing ad text variation, and you use a different tool to set your bids, then that's totally fine. The other consideration, of course, is make sure that the tool does push data back into AdWords in real time, and that there's no caching, because then your account could get out of sync. So you could have different changes queued up to be pushed into your account in different tools, and then once they both make those changes, they try to make changes on something that doesn't exist anymore. So that's when things go a little bit weird. Okay, so we're at time here, but and a more question, but we'll take those over email. So reach out to us via the marketing email address that's going to be on that last slide there, or you can send questions to me or Jeff specifically. So let's look at that next slide. That's going to have our email addresses. So we'll answer anything that was left on there. And then let's talk about HeroConf London, where I'll be speaking. So I'm very excited about that one.
Yep, I'm excited as well, and looking forward to seeing you there, Fred.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about our HeroConf sneak peek, and joining us any second now will be Nate Hollander, Hannapin's senior event producer.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm happy to be on here today to talk a little bit about HeroConf 2015 in London. We're going to run through these slides pretty quickly, Jeff, so if you can just scroll through as we go, that'd be great. Like Jeff said, our event is the 28th through 30th in London for the first time. We've done a series of U.S. events, but this is our first time visiting the U.K. We'll be in central London at the Millennium Gloucester Hotel, which is really exciting for us. It's easy access from all the travel options for you in London. So locally, it's easy access by train or close to Heathrow to get there as well. And it's London's only all PPC event. And for those that haven't been to a HeroConf before, that's one of the things we promote heavily. HeroConf is fully PPC, so there's no filler. We think it's a jam-packed event, but we also think you get your money's worth because you get only the content that's relevant to you. And Jeff, you've experienced that in the past at a couple of events. Talk a little bit more about what you'll be discussing there in London.
Sure. So yes, I have attended a couple of events, and HeroConf is great. It's my favorite conference. At London, I'm going to be speaking about display advertising and how you can win at it, and how display is part of the journey on the way to conversion, and how you can use display to help grow your business.
And Fred, why don't you talk a little bit about what you'll be discussing there as well?
Yeah, so this will be my third or fourth HeroConf, so I'm certainly a fan as well and excited to go abroad for this one. I'll be talking about Quality Score. So Quality Score, I was on that team at Google for about 7 years, talked about it quite frequently at conferences. And I think it's going to be very timely at this point because Google just announced a bunch of changes, and we've done a lot of analysis on what it all means, so we'll be sharing much of that in London.
Yeah, and we're really excited to have both of you there. They're being modest, but they're back because they were some of our best speakers at our past events. And they'll be joined by 40 plus other speakers on a number of very interesting topics. So we're excited to have them join us there. Like I mentioned, 40 world-class speakers. They're from all over the U.S., the UK, and the rest of Europe, and we're excited to get a nice mix of people. Some returning, but mostly new speakers. We love getting the new voices out there from speakers that haven't spoken at HeroConf before, and it's great to get a local audience as well. Like I mentioned, there'll be 45 PPC-only sessions. That includes 4 keynotes from some very big brands, including Bing and Google. So you'll get a lot of your questions answered and plenty of networking time as well. We're at the Millennium Conference Center, which I mentioned was in the heart of central London. Really easy access for our networking events as well as some exciting on-site events that we'll be hosting. Some other exciting things we'll be doing. One of the things that HeroConf is very much known for. Go ahead to the next slide there, Jeff.
Okay.
Our unique networking opportunities. So we like to really make a point to get out in the city that we host our events in. So we'll be in London, as I mentioned, but we'll really take in the city for those that haven't visited before. If you haven't, for those that have been to London plenty, we hope to give you some different experiences, both at the venue as well as out and about in London. That includes some receptions nightly as well as after-hours events from our sponsors. So really a lot of opportunities to build some networks with individuals you may have not spoken to before. Jeff, why don't you speak a little bit about your past experiences with networking at HeroConf?
Sure. So, really just this past HeroConf, I ran into a person that I met at the HeroConf in Austin, and it was just great to catch up for an hour and see how his business progressed, and we talked about his account a lot. So it was just great to be able to share those stories and also just run into a lot of familiar faces. It really helps out. I've had some people just reach out to me through LinkedIn or Twitter, whatever, and maybe looking for advice or just wanted to connect. So it's great seeing everyone in person, but it's the relationships you build and you carry afterwards that makes HeroConf well worth it for me.
Absolutely. And Fred, you've experienced that as well. Can you talk a little bit about how you think HeroConf is different from other industry events in that aspect?
Yeah, so I speak at a lot of conferences, and this is really the only PPC only one. So it means that every single person I run into is going to know what I'm talking about and be a potentially good connection, whereas a lot of other conferences, it's pretty hit or miss. And then I really enjoy the ratio of speakers to attendees. To be quite honest, it's one of the few times every year that I get to meet up with most of the other thought leaders in this space. And it's also fun to be social, right? It's not just all work. So people I've worked with many times. All of a sudden now we're going to a comedy club together and we get to know each other in a little bit of a different light, and so those connections are really good to make.
Yeah, and that's one of the really important features of HeroConf. In London, we'll have a 5-to-1 attendee to speaker ratio, meaning you have kind of direct access to the experts that are speaking on the topic. And really, we like to encourage our speakers to be part of the conference as well. They're not there just to speak. They're there to learn and really get to know the other people in the space. So that's exciting for us. And then we try to make some unique after-hours events. This is from one of our Austin events where Bing was our gold sponsor and took over a bar. We'll have some similar experiences in London. We don't have all the details yet, but we'll be excited to share those when we do. And of course, the last piece here is our one-on-one workshops. We have two different types of workshops in London this year. The first are our one-on-one PPC management workshops, and these happen the final day of the event. They're an opportunity for you to work one-on-one with experts at Hannafin as well as some of our other speakers on your accounts. So you come in, we do a poll ahead of time to really see what you're working on in your accounts and what you'd like to discuss. And you have 3 one-on-one sessions with our speakers discussing only your account. So it's really basically a PPC audit at a fraction of the cost is how we like to talk about it. It's your chance to discuss any questions you have and dive deeper into the accounts that you're working on daily. And Jeff, you've been part of these in the past. Talk about your experience there.
Sure. Yeah. So the workshops are a lot of fun. You know, you get to talk to people, but really be able to really understand the practical problems that they're having with PPC. So, you know, I find it's just as much of a learning experience for me as it is for them because the problems that go from account to account could be so unique. So it's a great way for the person at HeroConf that's attending to be able to share and work on the problem, especially if they don't have other resources to pull from. And it's great for us just to you know, sort of build out our experience and learn what other people in the industry are going through.
Absolutely, and recently at our past event we added a new kind of workshop. There are agency growth workshops, and we're really excited to bring those to London as well. Those are hosted by our President Jeff Allen and CEO Pat East, and really it's a small group discussion for half a day about the steps they took to grow Hannafin from a small startup company to the agency we are today. And really the people have found value in the advice that they give, and it's really talking about products, processes, and people and what you need to do to challenge yourself and build a company from the ground up. So that's an exciting new aspect that we'll have this year as well. It's the second time we'll host those workshops in the small group setting. Some other quick things we'll mention about HeroConf, some of the things we like to be are proud of, some unbeatable swag, gifts from our sponsors as well as from us here at Hannafin. Great stuff to take home with you, stuff you can actually use, so that's exciting. One of the other features we like to talk about is local food. We like to make it as specific to the cities we're in as we can, so that's something you'll see again. And then, of course, we like to treat our attendees right. We want to give you the most value for your dollar. So we provide some great after-hours events that we mentioned before. And, of course, the big selling point we like to talk about for HeroConf is it's just a whole lot of fun. Not only do you get to network with people you haven't seen in a while, but they're people that are in a relevant industry you get to know and make great connections with. And we try to put those in settings that are different than you usually experience. And so that builds some networks that you wouldn't usually build otherwise. So all that to say, thank you. We'd love to have you join us in London. We have a contest going on PPC Hero right now. It's the guest post giveaway. So if you'd like to write a guest post for PPC Hero, you can submit that to us and we'll select a number to publish and award a winner a free pass to HeroConf London. Otherwise, we'd love to have you register. That's coming up pretty quickly. The deadline for our price break, our early bird deadline expires on the 31st, which is a week from Monday. So you have a little bit of time left, but get those registrations in quickly if you'd like the early bird price. And space is limited and seats are selling quickly. So we'd love to have you all join us in HeroConf London in late October.
Okay, thank you, Nate, for sharing that, and thank you, Jeff. It was great doing a webinar with you. And thank you, everyone, for sticking around till the end here. If you have any questions, don't forget to shoot us an email. We'll be happy to take those offline. And have a great rest of your day.